Good morning. Welcome. Thank you for attending the Carolina Farm Stewardship Association's 36th Annual Sustainable Agriculture Conference. You have joined the session Silvopasture for Regenerative Poultry Production, presented by Jeff Siewicki, farmer operator of Vital Mission Farm on Wadmalaw Island in the South Carolina Lowcountry. My name is Roland McReynolds, and I'm CFSA's Executive Director. I will be your workshop host. I also have a small silvopastured laying flock at home, so I'm looking forward to learning a lot in this session. Please feel free to use the chat feature to introduce yourself and submit any questions for Jeff or for me throughout the workshop. And please remember our conference community agreements and keep them in mind when you engage in the chat or participate in any group discussions. I want to thank especially our session sponsor, the Food Animal Concerns Trust. Please check them out under the sponsors page of the conference app or visit them at the trade show for more information. And now I'm going to hand it over to Jeff.
All right, thanks a lot, Roland. I appreciate you guys putting this presentation on and looking forward to sharing and also learning from others. So yeah, excited about this conference. It's going to be a good one. So thanks for having me here. I just want to talk a little bit about what I've been doing on my farm. This presentation will be about raising poultry in the woods, aka silvopasture. Here's my title slide, and on here you can find out how to get in touch with me if you like. I'm on YouTube and Instagram at Farmer Jeff Siewicki. You can email me, jeffsiewicki@gmail.com, and then my website is farmingsuccess.net. And I talk about, I have some resources both on YouTube and some videos about some of the stuff I do on the farm, and you can explore more there. So as far as the presentation, goals of this presentation would be to learn the benefits of raising poultry in the woods. We'll talk a little bit about different types of agroforestry and silvopasture. We'll talk about how to implement silvopasture on your farm and what that entails as far as incorporating livestock and what kind of specific infrastructure you need to do that. We'll talk about a few of the challenges and solutions that I've had on my farm implementing this type of system. I'll give you some tips to how to grow your own trees for free. You basically propagate them. And we'll talk a little bit about some of the complementary enterprises you can do with this and how you can fit in other alley crops or mushrooms or cut flowers and different type of complementary enterprises that you can stack on to this. So it's not just poultry. So a little bit about me. I started our farm in 2018, so I've been doing this for about 3.5 years, and we primarily raise pastured poultry. We raise ducks and turkeys and chickens on our farm. I started and I quickly ran up a lot of debt on the farm. Just buying infrastructure, trying things, seeing what works, what doesn't work, experimenting a lot, buying inventory. I had about $60,000 on the credit card, and I was like, uh-oh, something's got to change here. And this year, we're going to gross close to $200,000 in our third year. And so we're doing pretty well now. I've learned a lot along the way, a lot about what to do right and what not to do. And I just hope to share some of that information with others. So as I said before, we raise chickens, ducks, and turkeys. Here's a photo of our ducks here on the bottom on our farm. All the pictures you see in this presentation will be photos from our farm, except of course of the corporate farm that you see there at the top on this photo. We also get duck eggs. We get fertile eggs. We sell day-old ducklings. And then we have different trees planted out in our pastures. So we'll get fruit and nut crops as well. We started with chickens on our farm, and we use a netting system. I'll talk more about that later in the presentation, but chickens don't really work well for a netting system. You can do them, but I found that they either wouldn't move when we rotated them to a new paddock, or they just kind of looked at me and like, hey, what do you want? Or they kind of went every different direction, like herding cats. And so we raise a lot more ducks and turkeys because we found that they herd much better, and it just works much easier with our netting system. So how we started raising poultry in the woods, you can see these are some of our ducks here in our pine forest, is one year we had a really wet winter. our pasture was really overgrazed. It was really wet. It was muddy. And of course, being wintertime in the off season, it was not the growing season. And we knew we just need to give our pasture some rest. So we moved these birds over to the pine forest, which was pretty underneath the canopy because a lot of the brambles and brush had died out, being that it was wintertime. And we were able to easily set up our nets in between the trees there and our electric netting and put the birds in there. And we found that they really thrived. They loved it in the woods. They built little nests in the leaf litter and the pine straw there, and they were eating all kinds of insects in that leaf litter. They're laying eggs, and they were just really happy. And so we really started to explore this idea and said, hey, this could make a lot of sense. And so we started looking at, there's a lot of benefits to doing this. You guys know that, when you rotationally graze your livestock, the eggs and meat are far superior in both flavor and nutrition. I don't need to tell you that. That's a photo of our duck egg at the top. There's nice golden orange yolks compared to a store-bought egg. We're utilizing a lot of the marginal land that we normally wouldn't use on our farm. So think about all the unproductive areas on your farm. You might have woodlots, you might have ditches or right-of-way, a fence row or a hedgerow that you're not using at all. It's just unproductive area of your farm. You can really maximize your acreage if you can utilize some of those areas. We're only farming on 7 acres, and we raise quite a large number of poultry on those on that small acreage. But the other benefit is we're giving our pasture some rest. So, that pasture was overgrazed, it was wet, it was muddy. We let it rest for 3 to 4 weeks, and it came back, and it was beautiful before we put the birds back on it. We also, a lot of times in the wintertime, I like to seed out our pasture. So we'll put different cool weather seeds such as wheat, oats, ryegrass, things like that. And a lot of times we like to give that seed time to mature, and that just provides increased food and forage for our poultry. And so we can really increase our stocking rate and raise more animals if we're utilizing this marginal land and letting our pasture rest. Some of the other benefits, of course, is your carbon, your forest floor is rich. And of course, with poultry, it's very nitrogen-rich manure. And so that nitrogen really jumpstarts that carbon forest floor, and we get new species growing up. We've noticed a lot of wildflowers, native flora and fauna coming back to the farm, a lot of wild turkeys coming back to the farm. The soil is getting a boost in fertility and production. We've got earthworms coming back. And of course, this picture on the bottom right is my little son, Finley, and you can see the grass is nearly over his head. We're getting increased carbon sequestration. A lot of grass is growing in that forest layer. And we've had an increase of organic matter by 2% in just 2 years on our farm, which is pretty remarkable. I'm sure you all know how important organic matter is on the farm in terms of increasing your soil health, your fertility, and ability to hold water. The other benefits is if you're under trees is they have shade, which is especially important in the summer months when it's really hot out. It keeps our birds cool and helps them thrive. And because of this, we don't have to build or move any kind of shade structures or chicken tractors. We don't use any chicken tractors on our farm. We use the netting system, and I'll show you how that works. So now we have reduced infrastructure. We have reduced cost. The birds are getting much more variety in their diet. So they're eating a lot of bugs in that leaf litter. They're getting different leaves and different forages that you wouldn't find in a open field habitat that you would find in a forest habitat. And as I said before, that pine straw or leaf litter is like the perfect bedding for nesting, for building nests, and it keeps the birds clean and it absorbs all that nitrogen manure. You can also seed a shady area. There's certain species that do well in shade, such as clovers we like to use a lot, especially if you have a little bit of sunlight coming through the canopy. Those will do just fine. And now we're also stacking enterprises. So we're growing livestock, we're growing trees for food or timber, and we're also growing that understory of forages all in the same land space. So this kind of ties in with agroforestry. And agroforestry is the intentional integration of trees, shrubs into crop and animal farming systems to create environmental, economic, and social benefits. And agroforestry can show up in several different types of ways. You can see here on the left, there's an example of mixed trees and shrubs. On the top right, this is an example of alley cropping, where you would have rows of trees and then rows of crops in between, kind of intermixed that way. And what we're doing on our farm is primarily silvopasture, which is the incorporation of both trees, livestock, and pasture all in one on the same land base. So we actually plant our trees not as dense as a woodlot, but we plant them open enough so that we still get enough sunlight penetrating the ground, so we get enough forage growing on the ground level. So if you want to start a silvopasture, there's a couple of different ways to do it. You can start with forest or woods, and you can do a selective harvest. So you can leave those desirable trees you want for shade or for food production or for habitat, and cut the rest. Or you're starting with a field, and you can plant trees and shrubs out into your field in a different arrangement. We kind of did a combination of both. We had pine forest, which we realized was providing very little food or habitat for wildlife or the farm. And so we decided to cut out most of those mature pine trees. We pretty much clear cut it. And so you'll see, pine trees don't really provide us much value other than for 2x4s. So we cut those pine trees out, cleaned up the debris, and then put seed down. And so we have nice open pasture. And then we started planting out our own trees. And so you'll see this picture here on the bottom or on the right-hand side. That's a pecan that we planted. And we dig really big holes when we plant them out. I've just found from experience that if you dig a nice large hole, it breaks up that hard pan layer, that soil, and allows those roots to grow and spread, and really helps the tree thrive. So that hole there is almost as wide as that shovel. So if you're implementing a silvopasture type system, the way we do it is we plant out young saplings that we purchase. So we'll buy young trees, 2 to 4 foot tall. We'll plant them out, and then we'll put a stake in the ground and surround it with chicken wire. And then we'll add some mulch, and mulch can be wood chips, cardboard, grass cuttings, whatever. And the mulch is crucial because we don't use irrigation, and this helps keep moisture in there, helps keep the weeds down directly around the plant. We kind of use a shotgun approach. So I plant lots of different species to see which species thrive the best in our system. And whatever thrives well, we propagate and we plant more of those, and whatever doesn't. So we're not interested in babysitting these trees. At least I'm not. We may get irrigation in the future, but for right now, I like to see what does well in our natural environment. And so the chicken wire keeps our poultry and rabbits and deer and things like that from eating our trees. So after we got our trees planted and staked out and covered in the poultry wire, we can bring our livestock in. Our poultry reactors are our lawnmowers, our pest control, and our fertilizers. And they don't ever ask for time off, or I don't have to put gas in them. So they're a great option. They keep the weeds down. They fertilize everything, and the netting, the poultry wire, keeps the poultry from trampling or eating our trees while they're young. So my personal belief is that the more diversity, the better. There's a lot of symbiosis that goes on. We have more diverse species all together in terms of trees and livestock. So our design on the farm is we do a multi-species cluster. So we plant everything in cluster, and we'll have the shortest species towards the south and taller species towards the north to capitalize on the sunlight. So we'll plant smaller trees like blueberries, small apples and cherries and things like that in the front, in the southernmost area of the farm. And then behind that, we'll plant gradually larger, like mulberries and pecans and chestnuts and species like that will go to the back. So we plant a number of different species on the farm. When you mix it up and you add more diversity like that, it does make harvest trickier, and it's not as streamlined, especially if you're doing any kind of mechanical harvesting. But we do any harvesting by hand, and so it's not a big deal. But the idea is that there's more strength when you mix species like that. So, for example, if you have a peach tree borer, a pest that likes to bore through the peach trees, if you have your Silvopasture set up so you have blueberry, apple, peach, pecan tree in a line like that, it makes it much harder for that peach pest to get to the next peach tree. You see what I mean? There's not a straight highway as you would have in an orchard where you'd have peach tree, peach tree, peach tree, monoculture all next to each other. And so that kind of breaks up the parasite cycle and makes the trees a bit hardier. And so we've had some success. Hopefully, if you do it right, you'll get fruit. And so we've got blueberries and oranges, some pictures of some of the fruit we've got on our farm. Silvopasture has been proven to be the most productive ecosystem you can have in terms of both habitat, food production, carbon sequestration, diversity. It is the most productive ecosystem. So in our system, we're getting meat and eggs from our ducks. We're getting fruit. We're getting pasture, forages, and grasses on the ground for our poultry to eat. We're getting seedlings, that we can take from our trees. So talk about stacking enterprises and really maximizing profitability. In terms of carbon sequestration, we really get the quick succession of grasses turning over, and then we get the long-term carbon storage in the trees. So it's really a beautiful system. So next, we'll talk about incorporating livestock and how that works in a Silvopasture system. So some of the info you would use would be a little bit different. You need certain infrastructure, whether you're raising them in the woods or you're doing an alley cropping type system or you're raising them in strips. Electric netting is kind of a must. We don't use chicken tractors. We have stumps. We have uneven ground. Chicken tractor would never work in our field. So the nice thing about using electric netting is they're easy to move around trees. You do need to have that netting hot, and that is key. So you need to have a really high-powered solar energizer for that netting, or plug-in power for that. You need to have feeders and waters that you can move through the trees and through the woods there. And shade structures you may or may not need. So here you can see like an alley cropping system where you have a field that has different crops in it, and then you have a strip of trees. And so in the summertime, when the birds are out in the field, we do need these shade structures. So we have PVC shade structures, really lightweight and easy to move. But once they go in, once we graze over and we move these birds over and they're grazing the wooded tree section, that strip of trees, we're obviously not going to need shade structures in there. So just to give you a few examples of the infrastructure that we use a system made of 4-inch PVC. We use a float valve on one end, and we can easily make this for $40 and water up to 250 birds with it. It's really simple. All these systems and everything, all of the structure and all the systems I talk about are available on my website, farmingsuccess.net. On that site, I have an online course that'll teach you how to start and scale up a 6-figure poultry business without taking on any debt. You can just go check it out there. And here's a YouTube link where actually we'll show you how we build that water. You can check that out if you're interested. The feeders we use double-walled irrigation pipe. We use 8-inch diameter pipe for young, and then for adult birds we use 12 or 15-inch. We cut it in half, so it's a half circle. We'll add a little wooden stopper there at the end, and then we'll add a slide it along easily. And we can put quite a bit of feed into these feeders, and they're easy to pull and move and dump out every day. Our 12-inch pipe A 10-foot section holds about 150 pounds of feed, just to give you an idea. Plus, there's a lot more space at the table, so to speak. So you can feed a lot of birds with one feeder there because there's a lot of room for them all to feed. And it's very cheap to do, much cheaper than buying those large bulk feeders. Some of the field shelters that we use, we make these out of 3-inch PVC. Here's one that's 10 foot by 20 foot. It's super lightweight. We can pick it up, move it by hand. We don't need tractors. I don't need a tractor. You can customize this size for depending on how wide your alley is. If you're doing alley cropping or you're doing rows of trees and crops. So you can make it thinner or wider or longer, however large you want to make it. You can also use 2-inch PVC, but there's some subtle changes you have to make, particularly around the corners, to make 2-inch PVC work and not break. But 3-inch PVC works well. We throw some tarps over it, very cheap and effective. So some of the challenges we've had with this system are predators and cost. And the first thing I'll do is I'll talk a little bit about predators and how to mitigate that. On our farm, we use guard geese. And the geese help really well with hawks during the day. If you're using electric fencing, as long as you have a nice hot charger, we don't get too many issues with four-legged predators like raccoons or possums or foxes. Every now and then we'll lose some birds if we forget to turn the charger on. And it seems like without fail, every time, if there's a day I forget to turn that charger on, the next day there'll be a dead bird. So it's the predators, they come out at night, they test it. They test those nets daily. And if it's hot, it works. They run away. But yeah, if I forget to turn it on every time, we'll lose a bird or two. But we use guard geese. The thing with guard geese, they help, but they don't work at night. So we still lose some birds to owls. And that's just part of the program. We accept that. So when we're raising large batches, we just know that we're going to lose some, and that's okay. We also breed. We have breeding ducks, and we hatch all our own ducklings on farm. So that helps mitigate our predator losses somewhat. Ideally, we would have a livestock guardian dog, but with our setup, we've got some neighbors that are close by, and I just don't want to have a dog barking all night. That would probably be ideal. The geese work pretty well. One thing about geese is if you do use them, either use a lot of geese, I'm talking 15 or 20, so they are a big flock and they make a lot of noise, or use one goose. We've tried using 2 or 3 or 4, and it doesn't work. The geese, they bond together, and if you have 2 or 3 of them, they'll walk off and leave the birds just to get feasted on. If you have one goose, then that goose will typically look over all the younger birds, whether it's chickens or turkeys or ducks, whatever you have. It'll kind of protect them as its own, and it won't kind of leave them to their own devices. So the other challenge we've had with implementing the Silvopasture cost. I'm sure you've seen the cost of trees. We've paid $75 for some small mulberry saplings that are a year old, and you think about you're planting that over a couple acres. That's a lot of money, just for the trees, and then the mulch, and then the stakes, and then you got the poultry netting. So it really adds up. And, if you want to plant all these trees out and then you want to get fruit or nuts eventually, you might be waiting 4 to 10 years for return on your investment. And that's a long time to wait when you put so much money up front. So if you have the money to implement it right away and buy that, great. That's great for you. We're kind of trying to operate this farm on a shoestring budget. That's kind of what I've been stressing, to not go in debt. And we've learned a lot of things along the way. So one way you can, save a lot of money is figure out what species you're going to want first. So if you want to plant blueberries, mulberries, pecans, oranges, and persimmon, and whatever it may be, plums and apples, buy 3 to 5 saplings of each species now and plant them out. It's not going to cost you too much money. Plant those out now, wait a year or two, and you're going to have to trim those. You're going to get branches growing through the poultry netting. When you trim them, you can take those cuttings, root them out, and then now, just from a couple of trees, you can get 30, 50, more cuttings from them, more young baby trees that you can then plant those out from your mother trees. So you plant out those new daughter trees, and you can basically eventually you'll have unlimited trees for basically no cost. The way that we propagate these cuttings is we have a small 4x8 frame that I built. I put landscaping fabric on the bottom so weeds don't grow through. We put 3/4 inch PVC hoops over it. That's 10 foot, 3/4 inch PVC, cover it with plastic so it makes a nice humid environment. Our growing medium is a 50-50 blend of potting mix and sand, coarse sand. And then we use automatic irrigation for it. We take our cuttings, we strip off the leaves, stick them in there. In a couple weeks, they grow roots and leaves, and then we can plant them back out. So in a very small area, 4x8, you can literally grow hundreds, if not thousands of cuttings in a very small area and grow essentially limitless for trees for eternity. So it takes a little bit more time to establish versus if you're buying these trees, but it's going to save you a lot of money in the long run. So when you're doing this type of system, you're going to get a lot more complementary enterprises rather than just raising poultry. And you can do this silvopasture type system. I stress poultry because that's what I do, but you can do this with small ruminants, sheep and goats. You can do it with cattle. You can do it with a number of different species. And you can add complementary enterprises on this to really maximize your revenue. So when you're doing the cuttings, obviously you can have a tree if you want to do that. You can cut flowers. There's a number of different things you can do. We have in our woods where we've put our poultry, lion's mane we've harvested, and wild oyster mushrooms in our woods that we've harvested. You could also cultivate your own mushrooms and do like the mushroom logs or start a growery. You can also do alley cropping. And so in between your trees, you can start an annual garden or a market garden. You can grow grains, and you can sell those grains for feed, or you can use them for your own feed on your farm. And so there's a lot of different complementary enterprises you can stack. And so you're really maximizing your potential. So we're getting, poultry or meat, eggs, forages, crops. I mean, there's so many things you can do. And here's a picture of me with our ducks. On the right is my son with some ducklings that we hatch on our farm. So we have a good time with those. And again, I just want to mention, if you like this presentation, you feel like you got some value out of it, check out my website, farmingsuccess.net. As I said before, I have an entire course, whether you're been farming for a few years and you're just trying to figure out how to grow and market and really be profitable. There's information about that. Or if you're new to farming, it'll teach you how to start and scale up a successful poultry business without taking on any debt. There's a lot of solutions out there, a lot of equipment out there that I've found that if you want to have a backyard flock of poultry, you can buy stuff from the big box stores for, a dozen chickens in the backyard. Or you can buy a lot of equipment for, a huge poultry operation if you won't invest millions of dollars. But if you're trying to do it, a few hundred to a few thousand at a time in a batch, there's really not a lot of infrastructure or knowledge or information out there. And so that's kind of what this course focuses on, how to start and scale up a small enterprise. So anyway, I appreciate your time. And if there's any questions, I can take a look at the chat and we can answer those. All right. So we'll just take a look. So I see one question. Are there certain breeds of ducks that you have had success with? We raise pecans on our farm. And the reason I do that is because they produce a fair number of eggs. So we'll get anywhere from 160 to 200 eggs a year from a pecan duck. And we sell the eggs, we sell the meat, and then we also hatch our own birds. A lot of people do, I know several people do Muscovies, and they work very well. They're a fast growing breed, and they do well, especially in warmer weather. And so I'm trying to do a pecan Muscovy hybrid. to see how those turn out. So we kind of get, Muscovies tend to forage much better than the pecans, which is an exciting feature. However, the females are much smaller at maturity. So if you're growing them for meat purposes, Muscovies, it's hard to only sell the males and then try to find a buyer for the females, which are much smaller. So we're hoping to try out a hybrid and see how that goes. So, all right.
Jeff, I had a couple of other questions myself. You mentioned, so you talked about starting the trees, the cuttings and that sort of thing. You know, I'm aware that with some fruit trees anyway, I think you mentioned persimmons, for instance, you know, they need male and female trees, right? To produce fruits. How do you manage that from from cuttings of mothers and that sort of thing?
Yeah, so for sure, if you got not all fruit trees need male and female or dioecious like that, but if they are, then yeah, you certainly would, when you're buying out your saplings, make sure you have a male and several females, and then I would propagate the females. You still need some, enough males to produce pollen and fertilize them, but I would propagate most of the females and plant those out. We usually avoid those species, but yeah, you definitely want to get some of each for sure. It's a good point.
Excellent.
Yeah.
And can you just describe just sort of in terms of moving that netting around the woods? I mean, like what's a day on the farm in terms of flock management and egg collection? I see that Nora's asked a question about egg collection as well, which ties in.
Yeah. So moving the netting, it's really not hard once you get the hang of it and keep it together. So if you're using, it depends on the density of the wood you're using. So if you're using a silvopasture and you have widely spaced trees and it's relatively even pasture, it's real simple. If you're using a more dense habitat, then what we do is we'll cut lanes, and the lane doesn't need to be very wide, maybe 3 or 4 feet, to walk in there with our net and lay it down. And so we can just cut lanes through there so we can get our net laid nice and cleanly. And we can go around the big trees, cut the brush. And it's really not a big deal to put it out and lay it out. It's definitely easier in the wintertime. There's not as much brambles. We don't have to cut as much. But yeah, during the spring and summer, we'll definitely be cutting a lot more brush. But it's really not too difficult.
So it's preparing those lanes for running that netting in the dense woods. You're essentially creating a paddock that you can put in the fence when you need it.
Yeah, and if you have a tractor, you can cut some access lanes to get in there with feeders and waterers and your netting, and that's great. I don't have a tractor, so we just go in there with a machete. And so usually what I'll do is our paddocks will be, the net I buy 100-foot rolls of electric netting, and I'll put anywhere from 2 to 3 rolls together for a paddock. So if I'm using 2 rolls, it's a 50-foot by 50-foot paddock. And I'll put anywhere from 300 to 600 or 700 birds, depending on their age, in that paddock, and keep them in there for 1 to 3 days, depending on how old they are. The benefit of doing this is they're going to get a lot more space than you would have in a chicken tractor. Most chicken tractors get about 1.5 to 2 foot of space per bird, whereas these birds are getting 3, 4, 5. You can make it as big as you want, put as many nets together as you want, give them much more space. So they're getting a lot more forage and staying much cleaner and healthier that way. So we'll do a 50 by 50 foot paddock for our meat birds, and then we'll rotate them usually every 2nd or 3rd day. So if it's not a move day, I'll be putting up a section of netting. The next day I'll put up the 2nd section of netting. The 3rd day I'll move them. And so it really doesn't take much time at all. You're talking 10 or 15 minutes and I cut the lanes with the machete. So I just kind of bushwhack. You're talking, 10 or 15 minutes to bushwhack with a machete, set up your net, and then, yeah, it's real simple.
Awesome. So, and then how about egg collection?
So our layers are ducks. We don't have chickens, so we don't use, nest boxes. Ducks, They just lay them wherever.
Right.
I mean, sometimes they'll make nests, and it's funny. Ducks will actually, they'll take other eggs and they'll put them and they'll steal them and they'll gather all their eggs. And so you'll come in there, you'll have 12 or 15 eggs that one duck sitting on that she rolled over into a nest. But they don't use nest boxes. Even if we had them, they just lay them there. So that's where the advantage of putting them in the woods really comes into play, because they can really, they like to get under something, and they feel kind of protected. So they kind of get underneath the shrub, be underneath their a little shrub or some bushes, and they'll make a little nest on that leaf litter, that pine straw litter, and they seem to really like it. So
cool. And you don't experience too much loss. Do they eat the eggs themselves? If there's crackers or that sort of thing, or
occasionally they'll eat an egg, but we usually collect them pretty early. Ducks do lay earlier than chickens do.
Okay.
So we'll be out there first thing in the morning. Every now and then we'll have one that'll eat an egg, but it's not been a big problem. Yeah.
Cool.
Let's see. If someone says they have an old growth forest, would this be optimal to use? Yeah, absolutely. Old growth is great because you're not going to have those dense brambles and woods that you would have to fight if it was a young forest. So it's going to make it real easy for you to get in there with your feeders and your waters and your netting. So yeah, absolutely. Would it be wise to start trees as well? You can. If you're wanting to plant different species of trees, such as a fruit tree, the downside of having an old growth forest is you're going to have a really dense canopy. You're not going to have much sunlight. So it's going to be really hard for those young trees to grow without getting sunlight. So you're going to need to do some thinning of that forest if you're wanting to plant some other stuff out. But you can talk to a forester. That's what they're there for. There are some great people at Extension Office that can help you with estimating how much you should remove if you're interested in thinning your land. All right. Someone said they're challenged with summer heat, making garden hose to water too hot. How do you handle this? Yeah, it does get hot in the summer for sure. Again, the advantage of being in the woods is if you have an irrigation line out there, that all that area is shaded. And so your water is going to stay much cooler, both in terms of your water storage as well as your hose is going to stay cooler if it's in the shade, much more so than it would in a field or a pasture. Do you slaughter your own meat, birds, or take them somewhere? Can you talk about that process? We used to do all of our own processing on farm in the beginning. When it comes to ducks, ducks are much harder to process than a chicken or a turkey. They are waterproof chickens, so they have a lot more feathers, and they're difficult to get those feathers off. So we were doing them in the beginning, but we were growing and we were raising more birds, and I just decided, you know what, I'm going to take them somewhere where they can do a much better job. They have a good, well-trained staff and have really good equipment. And so we take them to a USDA processor. The advantage of that is we can also sell our product across state lines, so it makes shipping easier. They can also do some other value-added products such as sausages and different cuts and things like that, which is great too. How often do you return birds to the same paddock? How much rest? How much land? Yeah, so that depends a lot on your climate. We have a really sandy soil because we're right on the coast here in South Carolina. So we can get away with really pushing, how quickly we come back, because that sandy soil really, doesn't hold the manure and the phosphorus and the nitrogen as much as a clay or heavier soil would. So we can really do it pretty quickly. So during the growing season, when things are really growing fast, we'll come back as fast as 8 weeks later, bring another batch of birds over the same area. The other thing with that is we're also giving them a lot more space and we're moving them quicker. So instead of them being as dense as they would be in a chicken tractor, they have a lot more space. And so we can manipulate how long they're in an area, and we're manipulating how much impact they have on that land space. So if I'm giving them 10 square feet per bird, there's a lot less manure, much less nitrogen and phosphorus and different things impact on the land than if they were 1 square foot per bird. If that makes sense. So that would enable us to come back even quicker as well. But yeah, I guess it depends on, how many you're raising, what the season is, that kind of thing. Where and who do you sell to? Yeah, so we sell, and I talk about this in my course. Portion of the course focuses on saving money. I think that's important. So there's a lot of DIY infrastructure, how we save money and do everything for pennies on the dollar. And then the second part of the course is focused on improving profitability and marketing, selling wholesale, selling to farmers markets, doing value-added products, things like that. And so we did a lot of wholesale in the beginning, and then COVID happened. We were selling to a lot of restaurants, and then everything kind of shut down, and restaurants weren't ordering anymore. So we kind of shifted gears in spring of 2020, started focusing more on farmers markets and direct to consumer. We now do 3 farmers markets. We have an online store that we use. We use Barn to Door through our online store, and they're great. If you haven't checked them out, they have a lot of great resources. You can do local pickup, local deliveries. You can do shipping, and that's really been our saving grace with restaurants kind of shutting down. And now that restaurants are kind of opening back up, we're doing more wholesale again. And so wholesale is a whole nother thing, and there's not as much meat on the bone because you're wholesaling it. There's less profit there, but all you really need is one good buyer can really turn around your business. I mean, it made a dramatic impact on our business. Just having 1 or 2 restaurants can really make a huge impact on your bottom line. As far as the farmers markets, we sell whole birds, we sell cuts, we sell eggs, but we also do a lot of value-added products, and I think that's important too. So think about the amount of time you spend raising your livestock, right? If you're out there 20, 30, 40, 60 hours a week, feeding them, watering them, caring for them, doing all the stuff you do, and you're selling, let's say you're selling a whole bird, you make $10 profit per bird, right? If you took that bird and you did cuts, you can do cuts of breast, legs, you can do bone broth, you can do pet treats with the feet and the heads, you can do smoked chicken or chicken salad, egg salad, like all these different value-added products you can do. Just like if you're selling cherries, or if you're selling grapes, you can do jam or you can do wine, right? To do these value-added products really doesn't take that much more effort. We use a local commissary, a local kitchen, and you're talking maybe an hour or 2 a day. So an extra hour, and we are, instead of profiting, so we can take a whole duck, and if I wholesale it, I make $10 off that duck. If I do all the value-added products that I do out of one bird, I can instead of profiting $10, if I retail that, all those value-added products, I can profit up to $70. That's a huge impact, a huge increase for just a few extra hours of work doing these value-added products. And we're finding that more and more people these days really like stuff that's already cooked, already ready to go. And so that's really been a big thing, particularly at the farmers markets. It's made a big impact on our profitability. So,
and Jeff, if I could just ask a clarifying question then. So you take your birds to get processed, but you bring them back whole. You don't have the processor make sausages or cut the breasts off and legs, or am I reading that right?
We a little bit of both. So we'll get whole birds from the processor. Sometimes we'll have them part them out, breast, legs, wings. And then we've worked with other processors that do sausages, and they'll do sausages and things like that. But when I'm talking about the value-added products, like the bone broth process, most processors aren't going to do that kind of stuff, chicken salad, things like that. So that's stuff that we do. We'll take the whole bird, we'll break it down in the kitchen and do those types of value-added products. And you think about, how much more that increases your profitability. Now, what this means is you can raise less birds on a much smaller space of land. And so now you can be very profitable, even if you only have a couple acres or you're leasing a couple of acres. So it can really, make a big difference, especially for small farms or small acreage. Yeah.
And are there any licensure or inspection issues as far as making those cooked food products, or is the commissary kitchen handle all that?
No, we have to handle all that. Depending on the product, you may have to get a HACCP plan, hazard control plan. And and then you're definitely going to have to get approved by, we get approved by the DHEC, the environmental group, that the same group that would approve you if you're opening a restaurant or a pop-up stand or something like that. So it's a little bit of paperwork. You need to make sure you have everything, you're doing it correctly and you're following all the rules and guidelines, but it's really not that big a deal when you see, what kind of impact, how much difference it can make to your farm.
Wow. Awesome.
I think that's the biggest thing, is there's a lot of farmers that are leaving a lot of money on the table. Essentially, a middleman's doing that, at a restaurant or wherever, or a grocery store, they're doing that. And so why not do it as ourselves as a farmer? It's really not that hard to do, and very minimal time to make a dramatic impact on your bottom line. So,
wow.
Yeah.
Awesome. I think we have some other questions in the chat.
Okay. Can you plant crops or produce in the location your birds have been pastured? And if so, is there a process to this to make sure any pathogens aren't an issue? We have planted seasonal vegetables in areas. And so that was really cool because we had our poultry come in, we let them graze it down hard. So they ate all the grasses, all the weeds and everything. And then we just put a little bit of compost in there and planted right in it. And it worked beautifully. All that manure is great nitrogen to kind of jumpstart your garden, and we didn't have to till it. So that's the other beauty, is they can really, let the livestock do the work. If you have pigs, you can let them go in there and kind of root up and loosen up the soil if you need to, then bring the poultry in to put the manure down and then plant into it. We haven't noticed any particular pathogens. If you're selling food crops in an area where poultry needs to be, or where poultry was, there needs to be a waiting period in terms of food safety, of human health. So you need a minimum of 30 days, ideally be closer to 60 or 90 days before you eat that crop. But if you have at least 30 days, it's generally referred to as safe for human consumption, since livestock has been there. If you weren't worried about your neighbors, would you definitely have a livestock guardian dog? Yes, 100%. Every day I'm like, I just need to get a dog because, we lose birds and it's frustrating. Yeah. In North Carolina, you can now add value to your meat in a certified kitchen for retail sale only. Yes, that's correct. All of our value-added products are for retail sale only. I should stress that. You can do wholesale value-added products, but it's a little bit more to the process, and so we just haven't crossed that boundary yet. I don't know. Were there any other questions that I missed?
Nora does raise a question there about organic certification and sort of going back to that withdrawal period around produce. Certainly with organic systems, if you're certified, it's required that you give at least 90 days before you harvest something out of a field that had livestock manure deposited. And if it's a crop that grows in contact with the ground, it's 120 days.
Okay.
Maybe you can talk a little bit about your crop mix that you've used.
Yeah, I appreciate that correction. We when we ever did a garden, it was only for personal use. We don't sell any of our it's always a small garden that we just bring in. So yeah, thanks for that. So I wasn't sure what the rule was there. We've just planted, like I said, just a small vegetable garden for personal use, lettuce and greens and carrots and things like that. But the poultry worked great for other crops too. So if you're doing, berry production, blueberries or citrus or whatever it may be, there's much less risk, I think, of poultry and getting pathogens on those fruit crops if they're elevated off the ground. But yeah, I would definitely keep them out of there for 90 to 120 days before harvesting and selling that crop.
Any other questions from our audience? Or any other words of wisdom, Jeff?
No, I think that's it. I think if you're wanting to do trees or silvopasture, they say the best time to plant a tree was yesterday, and the second best time is today. So yeah, just get started, and you can do it very small scale, very cheaply, and then just take those cuttings and propagate it, and you can easily plant a whole orchard or food forest or silvopasture, whatever you want to do, in just a very short time for very little cost. So yeah, just start. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the propagation center you set up for trees. I mean, that could be just as easily. It could be applied as well to seedlings, right? Tree seedlings.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I mean, you could easily make a small little greenhouse and grow them as large as you want, and then you can plant those out in your field, or you can even take those to the market, and sell little small seedlings too. It's another enterprise. So
awesome.
Yeah,
awesome. Yeah, this has been incredibly helpful. Jeff, thank you so much for taking the time to share this knowledge with us today, and for sharing your website. And I'll look forward to checking out a lot of those resources myself. Thanks very much. Thanks again to the Food Animal Concerns Trust for sponsoring this session. We hope that you've enjoyed this, and we look forward to seeing more of you throughout the conference. Thanks very much, and have a great afternoon. Take care, Jeff.
All right. Thank you.